Yes, very warm welcome, Betty.
Thank
To the
you. Thank
podcast,
you.
and thank you so much for your willingness to do this, well, Q&A session, we call it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Sounds fun.
Yeah. So let me start by a short introduction of you and me. So you are in the United States, and
Yes.
you are the creator, I could say, of the Wheel of Consent. And I think it's a great tool for people to play and to learn about their needs and their desires and their boundaries in interaction with other people, and mainly interaction involving touch. Yeah.
Great description.
Good. And I'm a Tantra teacher in the Netherlands, in Europe. And as a lot of my colleagues, I work with the Wheel of Consent. It's a very good tool for people who get involved in workshops where there is also touch and interactions with other people. And I have gathered different questions from my participants and people who follow me, and I will ask them to you. But maybe you want to start with a very short explanation of what the wheel is.
Sure, I'll do that. The Wheel of Consent is a practice. So it doesn't replace everything that you're doing in your life. It's a practice that's interesting and fun to do. And then whatever you learn in there, you take with you to the rest of your life. So it's a practice in taking, receiving, and giving apart, so that you're doing only one or only the other. It's a practice for two or more people. So you're doing only one or only the other. It's either all about you and what you want, or it's all about the other person and what they want. And in particular, it separates who is doing, the question of who is doing from the question of who it's for. So for example, if I'm running my hand down your back, am I doing that for you the way you want, or am I doing it for me the way I want? And that makes a very big difference. So the Wheel of Consent, if you look at it, it's 4 quadrants, and they're divided up by who is doing or who it's for. And I can do for you, or I can do for me, and you can do for you, or you can do for me. So that creates 4 different combinations.
Yeah.
And I stumbled on it quite by accident when I learned a game called the 3-minute game, which we can come back to. But when I started playing with it with my clients, I was doing sex coaching at the time. It just became obvious, like, oh my gosh, there's a lot here. It shows you what's easy for you and what's hard for you. And that's not always an easy thing to learn, because it can be awkward. And someone asks you, how do you want me to touch you? That it can be awkward. So by playing the game, playing the practice, you learn a lot about yourself. And as you said, in relation to other people, in the interactions with other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've gathered some issues that people mention, when they come to a training, like,
good.
Why do they go to the training with the Wheel of Consent? Like, it's hard for me to feel my needs and desires. That's what some people say.
That's pretty much true for just about everybody at different times. Yeah.
Or it's hard for me to really enjoy touch and to really receive it. I'm more like a giver. That's what a lot of people say.
That's very
Easy
common.
for me to give. The taking quadrant is difficult because I tend to be a pleaser. Like, it's easy for you. It's comfy for me. I'm afraid that people will not respect my boundaries, and therefore I hold back. And that's what I want to learn.
Yeah.
To feel their boundaries and to communicate them. And I have a specific question about that later on. I'm afraid that I will cross boundaries of other people.
Yeah.
And therefore I hold back.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Those are some really good reasons. And very common to all of us. And oftentimes you may not notice that until you are actually playing with it.
Yeah. And I think, so it's all about people cannot really relax in interactions. No, it's you know, a lot of going on in the head. And while touch is so healthy and needed. Yeah. So,
I think the one thing that I learned by playing with this, well, I learned about it by playing with it with hundreds of clients. And I think if I had just had 1 or 2 or 3 people to play with, I would not have learned as much. So I was very fortunate that I already knew how to take turns. And I had many, many people to play with. So that was fortunate. But one thing that I noticed was that a lot of people are tense, or they're reserved, or like, oh, I'm afraid. And what I realized was, to the degree that you know that you have a choice about it, to that degree you can relax. And it came about with this, became very clear with a particular client that I was working with, who we were playing this game, and I said, and he said it was his turn to ask me, how do you want to touch me? And you could tell he was struggling with, oh my God, how he was really having a hard time. And he finally said, okay, here we go. Do whatever you want. I said, whoa, is that what you thought the question was? He said, isn't that the question? I said, no. The question is, how do you want to touch me? And then I'll tell you what I want to do. And then you decide if it's okay for me to do that. I said, you get to decide that. And he paused and he said, I do. And it had never occurred to him that he had a choice about what I did to him. And that was a huge aha for him. It was also a big aha for me, because I realized, oh, if you don't know that you have a choice about what happens, you can't afford to get in the same room as anybody, because you can't, you're just like, you have to go with everything that happens. That's horrible. It's a horrible place to be. And so if you don't really know that you have a choice, then you have to be on guard, because something might happen that you don't want, you know. So once people learn that I have a choice about this, I want this, I don't want that, they relax. It's quite amazing. Yeah. And I think that was one of the fundamental ahas that came out of the whole wheel of consent piece, that and a lot of the practice of it is learning that you have a choice and how to exercise that choice so that you get touched the way you want, instead of the way you think you're supposed to be okay with, which is a very different thing.
Maybe that's a nice bridge to one of the questions, because when we speak about the context of a workshop, we say, yes, there is a safe environment, and now we can learn this. And then in Holland, we recently had some, let's call it Me Too scandals. So there, people didn't set their boundaries, or didn't probably have this feeling of, I can decide what I want and what I don't want. What's your view on that? Like in the big scale of our society?
Yeah.
How can we?
I think it's helpful to, because it's a practice, you gain the skill and get very good at, number one, asking for what you want, And number two, saying yes or no, or setting a limit. Yes, but only to hear, or yes, but only for 5 minutes. And you become more confident in your saying no and setting a boundary. And that's great. And then you take that skill back into your life, and life is more complicated than a workshop. Like, it's just more complicated. So you're on a date and somebody's being really grabby or pushy, and you're trying to say no, but they don't hear you. And do you just haul off and punch them in the jaw to get them to hear you? You might, you probably don't. Or maybe you say no, maybe you hint you're a no, but they don't catch the hint because they're just pushing. Or maybe you're on the other side of it. Maybe you're the one that you really want to get this thing happening. Sex, for example, you really want to get this thing happening. And so the other person, gives you a hint of no, or they clam up, or they stop moving, or they stop breathing. But you are so determined that you just keep going anyway. And so whose fault is that? Well, it depends. I can't say in any given situation, but what I do know is that as you practice the wheel, you get very good at listening to the other person's response. You get very good at hearing a no. You get very good at respecting other people's boundaries. And then hopefully that happens less. But it's very clear that people do things to each other all the time that the other person doesn't want. Of course, that happens all the time. Mm. And there's kind of a big argument going in the US about, well, why are we teaching women to say no when it's men who need to learn how to listen to no? And I think that's both true.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and does this mean that in Holland, we speak a lot about this, that we should start at school with it?
Oh,
or,
hell yes.
Even before, maybe the parents with a young child, like how do you touch your baby or your child?
Yeah.
And I don't know, have you already worked with the wheel in schools or know people? Because I can feel like in primary school, I can even imagine these kind of games. But then in high school, with people, young people, like, how do you want to touch me? Or how do I want to touch you? Or,
right.
Once you get involved, it feels like a bit difficult. Do you have solutions for that? How we can work with the wheel with young people?
Well, first of all, is that you don't have to teach the wheel of consent in its entirety. You don't have to, okay, draw it out and this is how it looks and this is the name. You don't need that.
Okay.
You just need 2 questions. May I and will you? And you need to be able to practice saying yes and no, or yes only to hear, or yes but only if only for 5 minutes or whatever. So that's really all you need. And the people who are teaching consent for younger children, of course, you don't talk about sex, but you talk about not hitting other kids on the playground. And, I think one explanation that I've heard used with children, which I think works really great for adults too, is if the other person is not having fun, you have to stop. Well, just think how that would change the world. If the other person is not having fun, you have to stop. Mm. And really, that's kind of what you need. Mm. Yeah. I have heard people talk about teaching it in high schools and colleges without using touch, but using the communication, the asking, or using it with listening the talking instead of touching. People are experimenting with ways to do that.
Mm. I feel inspired really to bring that to schools. I think it will be so helpful
Yeah,
for people. Yeah.
yeah. There are people experimenting with that in a number of different places.
Great. And they still use the words wheel of consent, or they let it
I
go?
don't know. I don't really know.
Okay.
And it's not necessary. It's not important.
No, the principles.
And of
whichever
course,
principles.
yeah. And of course, I'm not the only one who's talking about this. There are many, many people doing excellent work on consent skills for children. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Okay. Shall I go to one of the questions?
Sure.
People. So this is a question that you may expect from a man, but it is a woman, because I can feel sometimes that men sort of feel the burden of being a man and being seen as the perpetrator of abuse.
Sure.
And then they hold back because they're afraid to cross boundaries. But this woman,
Sure.
She wrote me, I had the experience in a more open exercise with a man, and I crossed his boundaries. I didn't know, but I only heard it afterwards. And since then, she has worked it out with him, but still she feels this fear of crossing boundaries, maybe taking too much, or and she feels this holding back, and she wonders if you have an advice, if if it ever happened that you crossed boundaries, and then you feel this, oh my God, let this not happen again.
Sure, of course you do. Well, I would wonder what kind of workshop it was, because if it was a wheel of consent workshop,
no, it wasn't.
Then well, good. Then we're going slowly enough and communicating about it. So one thing that I say to people when they come to a wheel of consent workshop is that you might think this is a workshop about touch, but it's not. It's a workshop about noticing and choosing what you want. And that is far more important than any touch that happens. And so we would be spending time teaching and experimenting with noticing what your boundaries are before anybody even asks, and asking but not doing, so that you have the practice of noticing, oh, it's hard for me to say this. Okay, I'm going to practice saying this. And it's a chance to practice it in a setting that is safer, because nothing is going to actually happen. So I would say in general, I mean, I don't know the situation that she was in, of course, but in general, I would say that there's probably not good communication happening before the touch is happening. And of course, you might change your mind in the middle of it as well. You might say, oh, I thought that would be okay, but it's not okay, so I changed my mind. Because a lot of workshops around touch, especially Tantra workshops and things like that, will assume that everybody wants to do the thing.
Yeah.
And everybody doesn't want to do the thing, or is not ready to do the thing, or the thing is not of interest to them. And so, but the Wheel of Consent workshop is about noticing and choosing and communicating. And that's the most important part of the workshop. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I hear in your advice, that she could use all kinds of situations to practice with communication first, and maybe leave out the touch for a while, and then first practice with that.
Yeah, yeah.
That would
and
be...
again, the Wheel of Consent is a practice for 2 or more people. So it's not something that, you just take into everyday life. I mean, it applies to things, but you want to have a practice buddy that you can practice with. And it might be a partner, it might be a friend. But it's a practice, which means you do it so that you gain insight and you gain practice and you gain skills. And there's no substitute for the experience of it, where you gain this insight and you gain these skills, because you can't think them into existence, but not very easily. It works much better to actually do them. Mm-hmm.
Even practicing a lot of time with the same person, you say?
Yeah.
Because I feel in workshops, like changing partners is part of the learning experience.
Yes, absolutely. And I encourage people to, in a workshop, to play with as many different people as they can or they want to.
Mm-hmm.
But even that is about choosing. So you're choosing, who in this room do I want to do this exercise with? I never assign people to work with each other, never, because it's a workshop about choice. And so choosing who you work with or you do the exercise with, is just as important as the choices you're making in the exercise. Yeah. There may be other kinds of workshops where it's appropriate to pair people up, but I never,
Okay, thank you for this question, for your answer. So the next question is about romantic relationships. And partly my own question, but it also came from another woman. Like, it feels like, okay, in a workshop, we can deal with it, but then with our own partner, it becomes, other dynamics come in.
Sure.
What she said is, I feel that the wheel can definitely help people to feel and communicate their boundaries more strongly. But I have the impression that in the relationship with my partner, saying no can become a sort of armor. Like, this is my no, and I have the right to set my boundaries. That's what I've learned in the wheel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that the willingness to compromise is missing. So that is what she is writing. And I can relate to that. Like, in a workshop, I can really respect the no of, the boundaries of the strangers I meet there. But then with my partner, his boundaries and his no can really get me triggered.
Yes.
Like, why? And he gets triggered by all my desires.
Yeah.
So what is happening here in intimate relationships that it feels so much more difficult? And what can it still be a healing tool, or is it only difficult?
That's a great question. Well, with a workshop, somebody in the workshop, you don't have any history with them. You don't have anything that you want from them. With your partner, there's all kinds of things that you want. I want you to think I'm beautiful. I want you to want me. I want you to take good care of me. I want you to be independent, but still come back to me. I want you to be, whatever this thing I want you to be. I want you to provide me with reassurance. I want all kinds of shit. It's like, I think it's really a reflection of how messed up we are in our romantic relationships. And also, of course, we have history. And I'm still mad at you about that thing that you did to me 3 years ago. So, and and I'm mad at you because you didn't wash your dishes this morning, like all kinds of stuff. And I'm mad at you for not reading my mind well enough to give me what I've wanted all these years that I have never asked for. Or I'm mad at you because you aren't you aren't smart enough, kind enough, masculine enough, feminine enough, blah, 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 all the stuff. So naturally, it's going to be more challenging with a partner. Plus, now we have all these dynamics that we have kind of built in. Maybe I have always given in to your desires and didn't have any boundaries at all. And now that I have boundaries, it's going to shake things up because we're not used to it, you know? So I think, of course, it's harder with a partner because all your stuff is going to come up and be visible. You know, you have a chance to, in the practice of the Wheel of Consent, the 3-minute game, you have a chance here to slow down and notice, oh, I really don't like this thing, but I've been going along with it for 20 years. So how do I say no now? And it's going to make a mess. And it is. It's true. Telling the truth can be problematic. And yet it's worth it.
So it takes a lot of awareness.
Yeah. Yeah. And take some self-forgiveness. Forgive yourself for the fact that it's hard, because it's just hard with your partner. Things are going to be uncovered that you have been covering up for a long time. Excuse me. You'll see things that you haven't seen before, but they've been there all along.
Yeah. And do you have extra tips and advices for people, couples who do want to work with the wheel together?
Yeah.
To make it.
Yeah. First of all, set aside a time when you're going to play the 3-minute game. The 3-minute game is what the wheel was based on, which is you take turns and each of you ask 2 questions. You can do them in any order. And the 2 questions are, how do you want me to touch you for 3 minutes? And then the other person says, oh, well, you blah, blah, blah. And you say, yeah, yes, or I can do that, or no, I can't do that, or I can do that in this way. And then the other question is, how do you want to touch me for 3 minutes? Which is confusing for a lot of people, but it's really a very simple question, an important one. And then I'd say, well, let's see, can I play with your hair? Can I feel your back? And then then you say yes or no, or here's the limit. So it creates the 4 quadrants of the Wheel of Consent. But the important thing is to put it in a container of, this is what we're going to do for the next hour. We're going to play this game. We're going to see what happens. We're going to see what we learn. We're going to, the purpose is to learn, which is a very different purpose than just having a roll in the hay. That's an American expression. Just having having sex, for example, it's a very different purpose. And so you come into it with kind of a more open mind about what you might learn.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Create a container. Okay, let's go into the container. We're going to play the 3-minute game, and then we'll come out of the container. And when you're in the container, you're very strict with the rules and do exactly what you agreed to do and nothing more. And then you come out of the container, and then you can go back to whatever you're doing. So that's one thing. The other thing is, don't start with sex. When you're first learning to play the 3-minute game and play with the Wheel of Consent, it's very difficult to learn if you're including sexual touch or genital touch. It's just really, really hard, because your habits are so strong there. Especially if you've been together a while, you have certain habits about how you touch each other, and it's very difficult to get out of. So I recommend that if you are asexual partners, keep the sex out of it for a while when you're in the game. Yeah.
And what if things come up, like in a workshop? Okay, we have a reflection afterwards. Oh, I felt this, I felt that. But you know, as partners, it can easily go into an argument or walking away even.
Yeah.
So what would be the best thing, you know, do that and then step out? Or
If I'm if I'm facilitating a workshop and there are pairs, couples in there, I tell them, you are welcome to work only with each other for the workshop, but I recommend that you work with other people because you'll learn more. And it's your choice. You can do it either way. And then when people reflect, oh, this is the experience that I had, or this is the experience that I had, and one partner says, oh, I got really turned on, but they were not with their partner. They were oh, I got really turned on. Well, that's interesting. And then their partner goes, well, blah, 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 you know, blah, 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 blah. I think you just do what you would do with any upset in a workshop setting, which is that you try to listen to it if you can, but you don't let it take over the whole group, because it's not the group's problem and you don't want to spend the whole time on it. But there may be something that kind of answers the question, or you may have to say, yeah, that brought up a sore spot. I'm going to ask you to come back to that later, and for right now we're going to stay in the workshop. You know, it depends on what the situation is.
Yeah, but what if people are not in the workshop, but they do it at home, and then things come up and you're not there to
well,
support
there's
them?
nothing. Yeah, there's nothing you can do about that because you're not there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to happen.
Yeah. And just be with the pain. Be with.
Yes, I do remind people that your feelings belong to you, and they're about you. And your partner's feelings belong to them, and they're about them. And if I'm giving the practice to someone to take home with them, a client to take home with them, I remind them that, you know, start slow, start with 3 minutes, start with your hands, start with, you know, parts that are not sexy, and feelings are going to come up. And just be patient with each other, be patient with yourselves, because feelings are going to come up. You don't have to fix them. You don't have to fix the feelings. You don't have to fix your partner. And it can help to let them know ahead of time that this can happen. And also, I do it in the room with them. When I'm teaching, I guide them through it while they're sitting right there in front of me. And so things are going to come up, the ahas are going to come up. I'm going to be able to see where they're getting lost and support them in that way.
And the specific situation of the woman that says, like, the saying no becomes a sort of armor. Do you recognize that people are so good in setting their boundaries now that it's maybe going to be a bit strict?
That's okay. I think it's much more important to really trust your no. And when you really trust your no, something magic happens, and that is that you begin to relax. But if you find yourself always saying no, well, there's probably a damn good reason for it. And it could be that you have said yes all these years and you didn't like that thing that she does, but you know, but you've been saying yes. And yeah, I think in general, respect your no, your inner no, because there is a reason for it. And once you really trust that you can say no and that it will be respected, then you'll relax. It'll be automatic. Yeah.
So that's
and take your time. You know, in the practice, it's built in to take at least 20 seconds or something. So, for example, I ask you, will you scratch my back? And then you take, 20, is that okay? Oh my, and then you really consider, am I a yes or a no?
Yeah.
And give yourself time to find a hell yes or a no way,
Yeah.
because it could be that if you're rushing yourself and trying to get through it faster, you're going to come up with a no, which is really means I need more time. Yeah.
This is like a challenging part also for a trainer to
Yeah.
really see that people, take their time, because usually it's, yeah, of course. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course I want. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then really
Yeah.
get people, in that
Yeah.
structure. No, 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 no. We're going to take 1 minute and you're going to feel and
That's
feel.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's hard for most people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a completely other question. Very
Okay, great.
interesting one. Yeah. So a woman, she wrote me, in your book, you described the principles of the wheel not only apply to interactions between people, but also to how we interact with Mother Earth, or how we consume, or how we take from the earth or
Yeah.
from other people without realizing that we are taking without consent.
Yes.
And she's wondering how you deal with that in your personal life. What do you do?
Oh,
How do you take from the earth without consent, or how do you deal with that?
yeah.
With that
That's a
awareness
great
that we,
question. That's
yeah.
a great question. Well, I'm on a computer right now, so I have taken metals out of the earth, and I don't think it harms the earth I think taken from the earth is kind of a difficult example, because we depend on plants and animals and minerals to live. And of course we do, and we're not going to stop that. And when we misuse the resources, like, we have oil spills that we don't fix, and that, we just rapaciously take advantage of the situation and make a mess, I think that's a different story. But using animals and plants and minerals is not inherently problematic.
Mm.
So, but in my personal life, yes, I buy clothing occasionally new. Most of my clothing comes secondhand, but was it made in a sweatshop? I don't really know. But so I guess this is to say that I am not 100% pure on this stuff, because I don't know how to be, and I'm just not clean enough to do it that way. So I recognize that there are ways that I take advantage of people halfway across the world that I have no idea of. And I'm just beginning to be more aware of the ways in which that happens. I have learned to be more respectful in just interpersonal relationships with people, friends and neighbors. Because I kind of have an attitude that, well, if I want it, I get to have it. And so that, that doesn't work very well.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, another question is also very practical. This is a woman. She explains that she receives daily care at home, also with the intimate parts of her body involved. And she tries to explain to the
So
care.
like healthcare, medical care.
Yeah, some kind of that. And she tries to explain to the caretakers or the nurses to ask for consent. And they do, but it feels more like a formality than really in a connected way.
Probably is.
And we know that nurses have limited time, so I think we all can imagine But is there anything you can say about that? How that could change a little bit, or maybe her attitude in receiving it? I don't know.
Yeah, it probably is fairly, what was the word you used? Routine?
Or
Uh,
caretakers, no?
yeah. Anyway, it probably could feel fairly routine.
Yeah,
I
a
think
formality.
Formality, yeah.
Like, is it
One
okay that
factor is,
I do this?
yeah. One thing to remember is that when you are the one who's being done to, so that applies to this woman, you are the one who's being done to. If you believe it's for you, it feels different than if you believe it's for the other person. So if you really understand that it's for you and it's what you want, then it feels different. But most of us, when we're being done to, will kind of automatically think it's what the other person wants. We kind of oftentimes automatically assume that they're doing it because they want to do it. And we're just laying back, letting it happen. That's what often happens, not always, but often happens. And especially if it's happening fairly fast. So I was at the dentist a while ago, and I was taking that nitrous oxide, the gas, that makes you kind of high. And the guy was doing things, in my mouth. And I noticed that I knew that it was for my benefit because I was paying him to do it. Like, it's clear, it's for me. But it felt like I was tolerating it, enduring it. It felt like he was just doing this stuff to me to be mean. And so I noticed that if I had him slow down, then I could remember that it was for me and I could relax and appreciate it. But if he was going faster, then I would just automatically feel like, this is awful. And so I was able to ask him to slow down, and that was great. I was also higher than a kite, so I was like, just like, oh, isn't this interesting? This is but I do think there's very much something to slowing down. I think this person who's asking this question, that may be it. It may be just asking them to slow down, because if you can choose, if you slow down enough, you can notice that, yes, I do want them to wash me in this way. I do want that. Instead of feeling like, oh, now I have to endure this being washed in this way.
Asking them to slow down.
Yes, it just may be slowing down.
If possible,
if possible. Yeah.
Healthcare.
Yeah.
And then more realizing it's for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it may not feel like it's for you because it's not pleasant, or you don't feel like you have much choice, or they're rough with their hands, for example. So it may not feel like it's for you. But if you slow down, you may be able to connect with that, knowing that it is actually for you. Yeah. I hope that helps. That's a very difficult position to be in, of course. Yeah.
So I think I have one or two more questions.
Let's go for it.
Yeah. Yeah. So there is one question. It's maybe beyond your expertise and ever, because it's about trauma. And I know that you have been speaking about trauma and the wheel of consent, for example, because of old trauma, people sometimes have difficulties to speak out their boundaries, and they freeze. But this is a bit different. So I have always seen the wheel as a possible tool for trauma healing. Like, for example, someone whose no or whose boundaries were not respected. And then in the exercise, it is respected and people can have positive experiences. But so I imagine that can be healing for people. But may it also work in another not healing way? And someone asked, might the wheel and the exercises in the wheel, might they be used as an unconscious strategy to avoid to face the pain of one's trauma? So an example, imagine that I have a trauma of not getting my needs met in an extreme way as a child. And then I step into the wheel and I do a lot of taking and a lot of accepting, and I get a lot of great experiences, but it's still sort of filling a gap and not really healing, because I'm also not facing the pain of my trauma. I'm just, as a hungry ghost, filling it. I don't know if you've ever looked at the wheel in that way.
Well, it's interesting that if you get something that you ask for, like, will you scratch my back, that you're calling that the tool of the wheel of consent, because it's really just asking to have your back scratched. Like, what? So ask the question again. If is it possible to use? So is it possible? I think, okay, here's what I think you're asking. We're playing the game. I'm receiving, I'm getting my back scratched just the way I want it, and it's not filling me up. Is that what you're saying?
It is filling me up, but the question is it healing trauma?
That I have no idea.
No.
But I think trauma is not healed in a moment. Like, okay, you scratch my back this once and now all my trauma is healed. It doesn't work that way.
No.
But I think that the more experience you have receiving what you actually want, then it is going to be healing. It's going to have a healing effect. And what you actually want may be the key here. Because you may say, someone says, how do you want me to touch you? Oh, will you scratch my back? Okay, yeah, okay. Then you just go through the motions. But if you take the time to notice, oh, what I really want is to be held, but I'm afraid to ask for that. Or I didn't know it was okay to ask for that. Or what I really want is for you to put your hand on my back and don't move it. But I didn't know that I could ask for that because I never thought of it before. Or what I really want is for you to listen to me talk.
Yeah.
So I think my guess is that the key here is going to be listening more carefully to what you actually want and trying that out in small doses. Asking you to listen to me talk for an hour may be too much for both of us, but maybe 1 minute. Or maybe being held, is comfortable this way, but not this other way, because this other way is just a little bit too tender. So let's start with this way.
Yeah, beautiful.
So start with slow down so that you can notice what you actually want and trust that.
Yeah.
It's accurate. And ask for it in small amounts, a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. And know that you can change your mind in the middle of it. I asked you to hold me, you hold me, and then my feelings come up and I don't want to, they're a little too much for right now. I can say, okay, that's enough, stop. So titrate is what we call it in English. I don't know what you call it, but it's a scientific term that means take it in tiny, tiny bits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think what I hear you saying is that the healing part is especially really, really feeling, what do I really want?
Yes. And
Yes.
so often we just don't trust that, or we don't know that it's an option.
Yeah.
I mean, I could have you put your hand on my back and not move it. That never occurred to me. I didn't know that was a thing that could be done.
Yeah.
But as you come back to it over time, you will naturally start to notice that there are things that you could ask for that you hadn't thought of before. Yeah. Which is another great reason to come back to it over time. Yeah.
Okay. So we're coming to an end, and these last things make me really realize that I should even take more time in the workshops. Like often I have, I'm going to do 3, 4, 5 rounds, and then we have this time limit of, for example, 1 day. But it's a great gift to give people the time, although they are, impatient, like, can we start?
Yeah, yeah, right.
We already want to start. And then to explain that, it's really,
we are starting.
Yeah, you are already, you're in it. Yeah,
you already
that's the thing.
started.
People think that it starts when the touch is starting.
Yeah, yeah.
But it started before.
Yeah. This is not a workshop about touch. It's a workshop about choosing.
Oh, I should change my title.
Yes.
Touch by touch. It's such a beautiful title.
Yes, yeah. It
Touch
is.
by touch.
It's a workshop about choosing, and that's very true. And you can choose to participate in this exercise by doing it. You can choose to participate by sitting aside and watching. You can choose to participate by taking a nap in the corner, or you could choose to participate by taking a walk and coming back in a few minutes. Those are all fine, and they all count because you're choosing. So much of touch happens without us realizing that we can choose. So much. And nobody needs any more practice at going along with stuff that they don't want. Nobody needs more practice. And yet, so many workshops reinforce the idea that you're supposed to like this, and we're going to do this thing to you, and you're going to learn how to like it, because what's wrong with you that you don't like this? Like, nobody needs more of that. Yeah.
And on the other hand, after practicing a lot of, this choosing, my experience also in my Tantra workshops is there can come moments that we can do an open space, like I call it, or other people call it a ritual play, and that we don't need to communicate a lot, only if it happens in the moment.
Yes.
Do you recognize that as well? That
yes.
I called it sort of going beyond the wheel.
And you also have made your agreements before you start.
Yeah.
So you are communicating.
Yeah, that's true.
You're communicating before you start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true.
There will be, we're going to keep our clothes on or off or whatever the agreement is. And it's in this space, it's for this amount of time.
Yeah.
If someone does something you don't like, move out of the way. So you are communicating. You're just communicating beforehand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
You have
Great.
one more, right?
No, that was it.
Okay, that was it. Okay,
the,
great.
the last one.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Let me
great.
just call your, name your book.
Oh,
I
thank you.
really loved it. It's worn out a bit because I read it. But people can buy that anywhere,
Yes,
I
thank
think.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So thank you very, very much
You
for
are
this
so welcome.
almost hour. Mhm.
Hey, great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. And see you one time. Are you back? You're soon back in Europe? Well, the United.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll be in the UK next week. And then I'll be back at some time, depending on the pandemic and whatever. Who God only knows what's happening with that. So I'm kind of waiting to see how it.
You haven't been in Europe all these, these
In the last couple of years, no.
Wow. I was glad that I could be there 4 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. I really love Europe and I miss it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Mhm.